That's
Hey, I just showered. I see the
It works. Well, I think we're put fiber in one area. Half the time. Some of them like every time I drop there, like after. I don't understand that one.
But you don't want to put. No, you're good.
Did you spray that right? Or is
Oh,
that-
yeah. You can sink it with concrete blocks or something. That's the only thing.
When I used to live in San Francisco.
Yes, I was maybe.
after
Yeah,
Christmas,
Karen, what time is it, please?
I never took them off.
7 o'clock on the dot. Okay.
Yeah. Problem with that is it goes like this. Big flame and that's good.
Then it's over. Yeah, you're way back here. By the time it's done, you gotta like jog in.
Actually, see.
It's my profile. Nobody can see you, my profile. Yes, the nose. No, we're just able to get it.
This is like.
Okay. Mr. Chair.
Too low. Okay. Too low. to start. You don't know old school gavel, but.
There we go. Just don't sit in it.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Well, that works. We
Thank you.
didn't move together. Okay, good evening, everybody. Well, with that, could we have our roll, or our attendance, please? Roll call.
Yes. And all you have, if you're here, all you have to do is say you're here today, so. I don't have
Wow.
to know where your mind is. Okay, Matt Kowalski,
Here.
Allison Heatley. Here. Karen Roberts. Here. Tom Phillips is going to be absent. Chuck Bell.
Here.
Walt Hubbard. Here. Jim Carney.
I did not hear from Jim, he's not here.
Okay, at this point, he's in. Kyle Marsh.
Here.
Dustin Wise.
Here.
And our student reps, Isabella Malik.
Here.
And Stuart Bowledge.
Here.
Great, we do have a quorum. All right, second on our agenda is the acceptance of the action on the minutes for the regular virtual meeting of July. Sorry, of August. So, sorry, is there any changes to that as posted? The minutes, any changes? Additions, corrections? Seeing none? All in favor of the minutes as posted, say aye. Oh, we need the roll
Who
call.
made the motion? Dustin made the motion.
But we didn't get a second though. Sorry.
Accept the minutes.
Pardon? I forgot a second. So who is the second?
Also.
Okay, second, thank you. Now we do any changes, but seeing none, right? Can we have a,
Okay, now do we have to, do we have to vote?
We have nobody from the planning commission that is attending remotely, so you do not need to take a roll call
Okay, so it's just,
so if there is somebody pretending, okay,
vote, then you have to take a roll call.
okay. So all in favor of the minutes as posted, say aye. Aye. Opposed? None, the minutes are approved. Okay, next on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Can we have someone move the agenda, please? Move Keely, do we have support? I saw Karen, so support Roberts. Do we have any changes to the agenda as posted?
Yes, I do.
Mhm.
Under item 10, the proposed business is for next month, Monday, October. It's the October meeting. I don't
Okay.
know the date, but it's not the 7th of September. 4th,
Okay,
October 4th. Thank you.
Okay, so one small change to the agenda. Anything else noted? Seeing no other changes? All in favor of the agenda as posted, say aye.
One more.
Oh.
One more.
Sorry.
Community Development Manager report will be voiced.
And what was that?
Community development office reports will be voice.
First only, so verbal report, we'll just change that.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor of the agenda as amended? Say aye. Aye. Opposed? Seeing none, the agenda is approved as amended. Okay, moving right along, public hearings. We have no scheduled public hearings for tonight. So next on is the pre-arranged citizen participation, which we do not have any pre-arranged citizen participation tonight.
And there's nobody.
And then, oh, thank you, Michelle. I forgot to check. Is this going forward? Will we be holding all our meetings both virtual, like,
There will be
Broadcast
a
as well.
hybrid through December 31st,
okay,
unless there's some change to the Open Meetings Act. Once we get beyond December 31st, the only time a public official would be excused from a meeting, or could attend remotely, would be for active military service.
okay, after that, okay. Okay, so that's for pre-arranged citizen participation. Reports of officers. I don't really have a report tonight, other than it's great to kind of be back in person, I think, and actually see everybody's faces. I know I think we've been remote so long that there may be some new commissioners that actually haven't ever been. I know Dustin is, I believe, at least one. And Chet, no, I think Chet's been on.
That's been a while. You've got new
Oh, yeah,
student
more-
reps
or-
that you've met virtually, but not in person.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so it's great to be back, I think. At least I feel it's much easier to run a meeting in person. So, thank you. It does say update on the meeting with South Township, but I guess that was the previous month, so
Yes.
we can cross that off. That's all right. Planning commissioners. Does anybody have any issues to share? Down there as well. Yes, Kyle.
So I saw last 2 weeks ago about opening on the Parks Committee. And I put in my app for it. Who knows what will come of it, but my question was, I know there's some discussion among planning about parks and how that kind of ties in.
Mhm.
We don't have an official crossover member, I don't think.
No,
We don't.
No, the council is the one that sets up crossover liaisons. We'll see how it goes. I don't.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. That was the only reason I was like, oh, maybe it could be useful because
Mhm.
from here. And then-
So you would be interested in serving in both positions if it was?
Sure. And especially once the subcommittee.
Yeah, no, I think it does, it seems to make sense, but we would need kind of a council.
I
Or
don't
at
know
least
that
probably
we
a
have
change in-
anything that says that you can't do two meetings, can't be in two. So
Okay,
I can talk with it.
Okay.
talk
yeah,
with
no,
Justin,
it's
but
probably a great idea, so, for that cross,
I'm not anticipating an issue because it wasn't brought up to me, so I think we'll just see what happens, okay? All right.
good, thanks, Kyle. And, okay, so, council ex officio,
I was actually absent from the last council meeting, so I'm gonna rely on Michelle for this one.
Michelle, no problem. Anything from council?
We had a council. I'm
It's
sorry, it feels
I
like
know.
it has been forever since we had a council meeting. Michael?
I don't think I was at the last one.
I mean, we had two, I wasn't the only member absent, there were two members absent, so I don't think.
We didn't have the work session because of
Okay.
that.
Thanks, Carol.
I'm not checking. We didn't have, I don't remember what we did have on the agenda. We didn't have
Yeah, I mean.
a big agenda,
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
like we have sometimes.
Yes.
So not too much.
No, so I think a lot of it, there was nothing that was planning commission related. Care to Cure wasn't on city council yet. They will be on the second council meeting of September. They did things like traffic order. They're doing a lot of policy stuff right now as far as a lot of discussion and review. There have not been any significant changes to any policies yet. But now that Justin is officially the city manager, he's able to start getting some things moving that planning commission, or sorry, that city council needs to address. They haven't really been able to address, so. Yeah, I'll make sure that there's a thorough report for you next month.
That's a lie.
Okay, yeah, no, that's good. And it's good to know too, now that Justin's firmly in place. I know that you guys probably, as council, you've got the leadership, it's all kind of in order now, so you can start working on that important stuff. So,
Yes.
good. All right, we'll look for that for next month. Committee reports. Know that we had the zoning committee report, but that's gonna be a separate item. So, Arts and Heritage, no, Parks.
There's nothing new right now in the committees.
Okay. So our verbal community development office report.
Okie dokie. Well, part of the reason you don't have a written report is it's been extremely busy. And I personally am a little overwhelmed right now. I'm going to be the grandma of twin girls.
That's the
Our daughter is going to have twin girls and she's due February 11th. So after the first of the year, I expect we'll be in New York at some period of time. And you may or may not see me in February, so, but you will be in very capable hands between Megan and Michael, so.
It's a well-deserved time. I'm sure she'll be.
a little- So, other than that, we have 2 new student reps. You've met them online, but you have not met them in person. Isabel Malik and Stuart, I can't say your last name, so please help me. Bovich. Say something about this.
Well, I know, sorry, usually I would have you guys introduce yourselves, but I guess really quickly, if you can just let us know your, maybe what brought you to the commission, if you have certain interests, and then let everybody else know what grade you're in and things.
I took an AP Gov class and I became really interested in just the government in general, so the way to get involved. So and I'm a senior this year.
So yeah, I'm Val Malik. So I started freshman year when the whole program started. And my friend who's also not the city council now, recommended that I do it. And so I was in city council for 2 years as a student rep. And then I came here for my last year. And he was here first year and then he went to city council for 2 years. So that's basically why I started.
She's talking about Alex.
Yeah, oh yeah. He'll tell you we're a lot more fun than city council. Wait, no, thanks a lot. We should walk off.
Not what they said.
Oh, we're way back. All right. So that's the supporting one.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you, guys. All right, so moving right along then. Citizens wishing to address the commission. I don't see any citizens here. Do we check online as well? Virtually.
Yep.
Okay,
You're good.
so one other question about are we going to continue that part of the community input virtual or no?
My understanding is we will continue to try and do a hybrid where we're in person, but we're allowing the public to see the meetings. There is a legal question as to without a change to the Open Meetings Act, can public input be provided remotely? So we don't know yet.
Okay, so that's still out. Okay, just wondering like if we learn to check on that as well. So, okay, so unfinished business, we have none tonight. So we're moving right along to new business. So looks like plug-in electric vehicles. We've got a little information on that.
Yeah, we've got a little.
Yeah, so we did have a little information.
Okay, dokie. You're gonna start with your PowerPoint or the PowerPoint, and Michael will move everything along, and I will try to keep my comments brief. You can follow along with me because everything I'm going to say, and hopefully I'll keep it short, is going to also be in this letter. I try to do a lot of graphics, but there is no way I can memorize everything that I need to be able to communicate to you. So we're going to start. This is actually what I'm going to be asking you to do, at least for this meeting and for the next one, is you're preparing for plug-in electric vehicles. And when I say preparing, getting the community ready to be in the position where there are spaces available or where you're requiring infrastructure to be available. So can you go to the first one? No, there you go. That's okay. Here, do you want to see this? Yeah. Okay. Move on to the next page. Okay, you all know that I love word clouds, so, excuse me. This is the one that I use to sort of start to talk about terminology. There's a lot of words. Anytime there's something new, lots of words. So who knows what does AC mean? Think about electricity, AC. Yes, yeah. And EVSE.
Electric
So-
vehicles.
Yes, so the terminology is all on the first couple of pages of the written memo that I did. So everything from the alternating currents and AC levels, battery electric vehicles, BEVs for short, DOE, Department of Energy. It's as comprehensive as it needs to be for the ultimate job that you've got to do, which is set up regulations. So. So there are three basic different types of electric vehicles. You've got your basic hybrids, they've been out for a while, powered by internal combustion engine with one or more electric motors. It's a battery that's charged through the repetitive braking, but it doesn't get plugged in. And the combined benefits of high fuel economy and low tailpipe emissions, made these types of vehicles, desirable. But it's the second two that you see on the screen that are the ones that you're going to be asked to be getting prepared for. And those are the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, PHEVs for short, or battery electric vehicles, BEVs. Both have, so the hybrid, the PHEVs, powered by a combination of battery powered and gasoline or diesel. They charge their batteries through charging equipment and regenerative braking. And then depending on the source and how often the vehicle is operated in an all-electric mode, the PHEVs may produce a lower level of emissions than a conventional engine car. BEVs, they are solely by electricity stored in a battery. EV batteries are charged by plugging the vehicle into an electrical source. And the US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, categorizes all electric vehicles as zero transmission vehicles. Why? You're probably wondering. They don't have any emissions. Okay. So the different mobility options, we're going to be concentrating probably on the first two in this community right now. That's the passenger vehicles, because they're going to be in residential homes, they'll be at businesses, they may be even in public parking areas. And then you've got fleets, businesses where they have their own vehicles. Dexter Community Schools, and technically their school bus garage, I believe is in Scioto Township, but that's an example of a fleet, all right? We do have some mass transit, and I use that really softly. And hopefully as Dexter develops its transportation networks, Scioto Township is developing theirs. We will all be interconnected, and bus service will be something that you eventually have to plan for electric bus vehicles. School buses, well, I already talked about that one. And then you've got airports. I don't really see us having the airport or port issue right now. Just keep it in your back pocket as a just in case. Okay. So then we've got EV infrastructure. Now, if anybody already knows all this, just raise your hand and let me know, because I'm going to turn this over to you, because the more I talk, the more my voice is going to go. That's just the reality nowadays. I don't see any hands though, so I guess I'm okay. I'm on my own. All right. So what you've got your electric vehicle supply equipment. So the technology that controls the energy supply to a single PEV. PEV is? Okay. You can have a piece of pizza. Okay. It's also called a port. An EV SE cannot charge more than one vehicle at a time. Do not get confused with a station. A station, you're going to be able to charge more than just one vehicle. Okay. It's often called a location in the Open Charge Point Interface Protocol. Again, another acronym, OCPI. A collection of one or more EVSE at an address. That's what a station or a location is called. A station has one or more EVSEs at the same time, and you see on the screen in front of you, and for Mr. Hardy, you see it on your screen in front of you. You see what the OCPI protocol looks like. On the next page, you have a bigger station location, and you can see how more than one ESVE port is available and multiple vehicles can be charged. Excuse me. You're probably wondering, well, what does that matter? Well, at some point, can you envision that maybe somebody does this as a way to make money? So currently, we've been used to gas stations. Maybe eventually we get to the electric charging station. So, okay, next page. So what 1 hour of charging with different chargers looks like. So basically what this tells you is, so if you've got a level 1 charge, a charging apparatus, 1 hour provides you a 5-mile range, depending on your vehicle model. And that's the same for all 3 levels. All of the miles per charge will be based on whatever your vehicle model is. So with a level 2 charging station, 1 hour gives you 30 miles of range. When you're at a DC fast charging, a DCFC, who knows what DC means? You can have pizza too. Okay, a 1 hour of a DCFC charge provides about 150 to 210 miles of range. Again, depending on the model, but also the DCFC power level. One of the things that I thought was very interesting, there is I don't have it on there. There is an equation for what I'll have to find, never mind. I'll find it and be able to tell you next time. The next slide shows you level 1, level 2, and level 3 charging types and what their, let's call them manufacturer cut sheet details are. So you've got everything from your charge type to your connection type, your outlet, power consumption, power output, what it's best suited for. Level 1 is purely residential. You're not putting a level 1 out in a public parking lot or at a commercial. You're not using that for your commercial electric charging station. Your level 2 is going to be at a home, in a garage. It's also most likely going to be the most common charging station in a public place. And then the DCFCs, I can hear the train coming. It is, I've been waiting for this. Okay. The DCFC is the kind of station you're going to see at places along the highway. So think of your MDOT carpooling lots now. Those are some of the places that if they're not already being located. Those are some of the first places. It's not like it's going to be on the side of the freeway, at least to the best of my knowledge. And if I'm wrong, somebody can correct me. All right, next page. So believe it or not, like everything else in this world, there's charging infrastructure and their priority locations. So you're at home, single family, multiple family, that's your AC level 1s and 2s. When you, and that's your base. That's the biggest market out there. Your level, you also have an AC level 1 and 2 for employees at work in your fleets. And then when you get to your entertainment, shopping, recreation, you're going to have level 1s and 2s. When you get up into the interstate, that's your level 3 or your DCFCs. The next page just shows you that for those areas, workplace, this is, believe it or not, the primary motivator of why this is being brought to you. I think you all recall, we do have a commercial property owner, the gentleman that's taken over the former Encore building, 3126 Broad. He's the one that wants to put some electric charging stations right there on his Broad Street frontage for the tenants that use his building. But he's also toying with the idea of having them be available for the public. Currently, right now, if you're doing it to try and make a profit, it's not, you probably have a better chance of winning a lottery. It's not going to be a big money maker yet, but there are always going to be these pioneers that find ways to make things work. But that's the primary reason you're being asked to look at this today. So where are we at? The primary reason, the two key investment elements for the infrastructure and where they're located are the power level and the location. So that also helps to explain why this pyramid is the way that it is. Excuse me. The next page is examples. So along I-96, and not really along I-96, but out in Livingston County, there is a electric DC fast charging station. The state, when you click on one of these links that's in this report, it will actually take you to the state's plan, if you will, for the areas that they're prioritizing for putting these stations in. Yes,
Do people have to pay to use that? Because they do.
they're going to be paying for them. I'm not too sure yet how. That's like the next segment, next month. I'm not there yet. Okay. The fast charging stations at Roundtree Plaza in Washtenaw County, that's a commercial site. So those are just two examples. Environmental benefits. There's lots written about the environmental benefits. There are some very basics, lower emissions, the noise. There's actually been a downsize to the lack of noise that electric vehicles make. If you're a person that's non-sighted, you use your hearing to be able to judge traffic, as well as, I mean, you use other things too, but you use your hearing. Well, the electric vehicles don't make much sound, and it can throw them off. So there are some trade-offs.
Those decided people off.
There's some economical, and there's also some jobs. So without getting into political discussions, as this new technology comes on, there opens more jobs. Okay, the next few slides give you, have to, there's not a lot of lights here. The averages for annual emissions per vehicle with and the different sources on the state as well as nationally. That's more just some basic data for you. And then you've got the annual fuel cost ranges for light duty trucks by technology and type. And that's the annual costs. It just gives you some information. Excuse me. Okay. And then whenever you're looking at the infrastructure considerations, think of it like an iceberg. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you can't see. And a lot of that are soft costs. We will learn as we go. Sometimes we might bump into things. Hopefully we don't hit an iceberg and sink, but there's still going to be a lot of learning that we're all going to be doing. Okay, so when it comes to the local considerations, equipment cost is one of the first. And for a level 1 charging station, the cost is somewhere between $300 to $1,500. A level 2 is $400 to $6,500. And then the DC fast charging, which I doubt that that's something we're going to see, but we will be looking at regulating. That's going to be the $10,000 to $40,000 price point. Locations and conditions, demand and availability, all of that kind of stuff affects the price. And then there are a number of current equipment providers. There are a number of different links throughout the report for you to, if you want to take a more deep dive for that information. And then installation costs for the 3 different types of stations. The previous was just the equipment. Now we're going to talk about installing it. So level 1 can be up to $3,000. For a level 2, you're looking at $600 to $12,000 plus dollars. And then the DC fast charging, that's anywhere from $4,000 to $51,000. These require permits, they require electrical inspections, and it requires people to know what they're doing. So it's a good, talk about a very lucrative job. Okay. Excuse me. You've got different models. The ownership model is whether you're talking about public or private. They're utilized for the public EVSEs, for a site hosted or third parties. The electric vehicle supply equipment is owned by a site. Host is purchased, installed, and it's maintained by that site host. That would be equivalent to what Mr. Schuster wants to do at 3126 Brock. You've got third-party owned EVSEs. They're installed and maintained by a third party, typically a charging network, which sometimes minimizes the responsibility of a host. Revenue earned by the third party owned station may be divided between the site host and the third party based upon agreements. So think of a gas station, mobile gas station, the people that own the convenience store and run it, they are the site host, but it's a third party that actually owns everything. It's kind of that simple.
There's actually one of those in Dexter who owns.
Yes, I've heard about that. Yeah, yeah. We won't talk about that. So, because you don't have an ordinance, we just kind of, we'll get this so that we can. I just.
Okay.
Yeah. So, okay. Then you have operation and maintenance. The equipment charging infrastructure has ongoing costs after installation. That probably doesn't surprise anybody. You buy a house, great, you move in, there's always something you gotta fix. So this is no different. You have the cost for electricity, and depending on the location, whether it's commercial or residential, the time of day. DTE offers residential owners a variable rate. The rates change during the day to encourage charging overnight when you're not at peak demands. So while they could make a higher rate, if the peak demand drains the system too much, it ends up causing problems. We all know that when you run our air conditioners in really, really hot days and everybody's doing it, it really weighs on the system. If you live in California, it gets shut off. But thankfully, we don't live there. Okay, so, and then there's some minor cost per kilowatt hours provided. Maintenance and warranty, charging cables need to be stored to prevent damage. Just some basic information there. And then there are fees, the EVSE, the charging providers that charge for the use of their equipment may also incur fees, and those fees get passed on. Then you've got signage in wayfinding, just like with a parking lot. And you've seen, we have signs that show where different parking lots are or where different businesses are. You need to have signage that identifies where your EV stations may be. And if you have electric vehicle designated spots, just like with a handicap or a barrier free parking space, if you want to be able to enforce that, you have to have proper signage. Luckily, there are pioneer communities that have already done a lot of this work for us. The city of Auburn Hills was an early pioneer. They've had this for over 10 years now. The signage that you see they developed, they got it approved by MDOT, and it is, if it's not already included in the Michigan Manual for Traffic Control Devices, it will be on the next go around. But that's the signage that you see is the enforceable signage that would be put up. Okay. Just like with ADA, there are standards for how many parking spaces within a, let's say, a commercial site should be made either electric vehicle ready or constructed. And this chart, it's a little small here, it's a little small here, it's bigger in the report, but that basically breaks down for you everything from the number of spaces, 4% of parking, or 1 for every 25 spaces, as any given, depending on the use. Then you've got your parking stall requirements, you've got your accessible route width, accessible route shape and cross slopes. Some of the same criteria that is engineered for ADA spaces and accessibility get baked into an EV ordinance as well. And then, of course, just like with a regular parking space standard, you're going to have siting and installation standards for your EV parking spaces, whether it's angle on Main Street, parallel on Ann Arbor Street or a residential street, in someone's garage, in a parking garage, think of 150 Jeffords. Then you've got a commercial parking lot in a retrofit. Think of Dexter Crossing with Bush's. You will be looking and considering standards to accommodate that as well. And then you've got your commercial and ADA as well. You can have an ADA space that is also an electric vehicle space. So you're going to have double the signage and for enforceability. And you can, for new development, you're going to be determining, the big question for you tonight is whether you're going to be having staff prepare the ordinance for you to make it EV ready or EV required. So in this slide and on page 26 of your packet, where it's readable, you've got the outline of directions for what you do if it's a readiness option versus a requirement option. So with the readiness option for residential, you're being proactively, it would be proactively planning for and accommodating the anticipated future growth in market demand for electric vehicles. This is the type of language you write. It's strongly encouraged but not required that all new one-family and multiple family homes with garages be constructed to provide a 220 to 220 volt 40 amp outlet on a dedicated circuit and in close proximity to designated vehicle parking to accommodate the future hardware installation of a level 2 vehicle charging station. That's different from a required option, which might say no new building shall be erected unless the parking for bicycles, electric vehicles, and motor vehicles required by, as required by section, whatever that number is. And ours is 519. Auburn Hills uses the readiness model. They've done that from the get-go. City of Ann Arbor uses the requirement option, and SEMCOG, which has this wonderful plug-in electric vehicle toolkit site, which I cite in this in my report. Great resource. You can really dive deep into this and learn more than you need to know for regulating, for buying. I mean, you could end up down a rabbit hole and it would be a really comfortable rabbit hole. There's lots of information. It's very informative. But they cite both Ann Arbor and Auburn Hills as two examples, exemplary examples for the way they've crafted their ordinances and for the way they've targeted their intent and execution. So a lot of our discussion tonight is going to focus on not what the regulations will be right now. This is a lot to digest. What direction do you want to go? Do we make it readiness or do we make it required? So, and we'll get into that a little bit more in just a second. And then just some very basics. If we're doing the intent, if it's accepting or encouraging for a readiness ordinance, it's going to be one of those two. If it's required, it's going to be more assertive. That's just obvious. But the permitted locations is probably going to be the same. Level 1 and 2 vehicle chargings would be permitted in every zoning district when accessory to a primary permitted use. Those stations are going to be located in a single family or multiple family or mobile home park or for mobile home park dwellings. They designated as private restricted use only. In other words, it's not commercial. If they let their neighbor use it, they can't charge them for it. They can't make it a commercial. It will not be a home occupation. Excuse me. The installation shall be subject to a permit that would be approved administratively. The level 3 or the DCFC, those are charging stations that would be permitted in your downtown central business district, village commercial, the C1 district, the R&D district, the industrial zoning district. Again, when accessory to primary permitted use. The installation shall be subject to permit approved and administered by the zoning administrator again. The only time, and these are, when they're in those, for those uses, that's the uses for the business or for their customers stopping in. It's not something they're charging someone for. When you start to get into the charging, it is suggested that those be, excuse me, those are retail electric charging stations, and they should be considered the same way you consider a gasoline service station. For zoning purposes, the installation would be, or a request would be subject to a special land use approval, and it would be located in a zoning district which permits automobile service stations. While it might not get a lot of use now, and you might not get a lot of demand right now, eventually they could pop up on every corner, like they used to say gas stations and banks did. So you want to have a little more tight control over it. You want them to function properly. You want them to be safe and secure and protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community. So what are our next steps? Before I go into that, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, Michelle, how would it prove something like one of the examples, putting a station up on a private business property, that's a bit of a mix of benefits for the customers, but also potentially making money for a certain network.
So it would be looking the same way that, think of Kroger, big grocery store, parking lot, they put a gas station in.
Right, I'm not saying about that, I'm very close to that.
Okay.
Very.
That's fine, we can have, I look forward to the discussion. Again, like I said, it's suggested. Ann Arbor regulates things very controlled, and they provide very good structure for that. If that's not the way that this community wants to, this board wants to go, that's fine. I'm not married to anything from, as your planning professional right now. There's a lot to learn with this.
That to me is just gonna stop.
I'm sorry.
That to me is just gonna stop it from there.
You could have a very good point. What do we see plug-in electric vehicles as? Something that we welcome, and this is an open question to everyone to help with the discussion. Do you see these as something we need to be ready for and require? I'm sorry, not just ready for, but require? Do we make this as streamlined as possible so that as the technology continues to improve, if there aren't barriers for the development? Or are you looking more to take a step back and be very cautious and what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to, possibly, but I don't want to use words that would implicate or indicate any kind of bias or try and lead you in any direction. I really do want an open discussion so that I know what direction to start providing regulations for. And then the only other, this is primarily going to be an amendment to your zoning ordinance. There's one amendment to the general code, and that's just so that when you designate a space, whether it's in a public parking lot or a private area, private parking lot, not a private residence. As long as the signage and the pavement markings are meet the Michigan manual, enforcement can happen to ensure that nobody's using the space and preventing somebody from actually using an electric charging space. Does that make sense?
I've got a question in regards to Ann Arbor.
So, yeah, I will take, so I'm sorry, were you
Go
going?
ahead.
Okay, so I was gonna also, I mean, maybe you can ask your question, 'cause I was gonna add a little bit to that, because I've been working with it, to Michelle's, with the EV parking ordinance in one way or another in about a year and a half, but for about a year and a half in Ann Arbor. But maybe what was your question? Because then I have some notes I was gonna add there, but.
My question had to do with, does every new house, every new building that goes up in Ann Arbor now have this requirement?
Yes.
So
So,
I'm putting in a single family residence.
except, sorry, not Site plan single, so not an individual single family home. If you put up one on an individual lot, no. But if you put up a subdivision of single family homes, then yes.
Say yes, does that just mean that there needs to be an outlet in the garage capable of fitting a charger or a charger?
Correct. It has to be, they have to be EV, sorry, they have to be EV ready. So, which means that they have to be able to, you have the conduit all there and you put up the station there. So it's kind of like the second thing. They've got it, they don't have the station installed, but they've got it all wired. So you get an electric car, you put that charging station, you install it and your house is already wired for that.
I mean, they can put a dryer out in the garage.
Pretty much, correct. So,
220.
correct. So I'll say that I can add a little bit to this because Ann Arbor's had it on the books for about 1.5 years now. Ann Arbor, it's required, as I said, for any new site plan development, so anything from 3 units and above. Now, obviously, Ann Arbor is a much different animal because so basically we've already, I mean, we've had 4 variances already applying to get out of the parking requirements. 3 of them have been churches because, so being required, there was kind of, I think, a gap between when the energy office was working on solar requirements and planning. They put, so it's 25% of your total parking is EV ready, 10% is EV, 15% is EV installed, and like 10% is EV capable. So Ann Arbor has 3 categories: EV ready, EV capable, and EV installed. So, and we covered the EV ready here, but EV capable, basically all that is just, you're putting in your electrical box, you're putting in the circuits for it and everything else, and running some conduit, but that's it. And it kind of stubs in the ground there. And then EV ready has it like at the location and obviously EV installed. The main issue we're finding, I mean, like with the larger developments, now we won't have these issues in Dexter because we don't, I mean, all our large developments are built. I mean, we're not going to have a new country market strip mall. So, and, well, assuming we're not annexing a lot of chunks of land, which we're not, but so that's where it's really big for the churches. It came up to be like 100 and some EV spaces. They were saying it was cost prohibitive. It was killing their development. They provided numbers and charts and all that kind of things. There's another factor that went along with that in that they have to conduit, you either have to bore it or you got to trench it. Now, a lot of landscape islands already have landscaping in them. So some of what they wanted, certain improvements, parking lot's going to be ripped up, other ones weren't. But now we're telling them they got to rip up these landscape islands or run bore all these EV lines underneath there. So we were getting a lot of resistance from that because 1, we don't want to rip out landscaping islands or mature landscaping, and 2, the boring of all those utility lines could get a little expensive. So this was coming up more with kind of these half projects like the churches, or also we've had 3 churches, and like I said, one of them has already been granted a variance of the EV parking, which is pretty much a variance of 90% of the requirements. And then I have 2 more that are applying in the next month that would be going to the ZBA, also applying for variances of the EV parking. We have an apartment complex that also a really large apartment complex that is coming in for a kind of a smaller site plan, but they get zinged. They're also going to be applying for a variance to get out of the EV parking. So the prescriptive, I think on these larger parking lots is where it's really where these requirements are. They're becoming, and I don't know, again, you could say, well, the developer is cost prohibitive, they can afford to install that, but there's other side issues that come along kind of with that. We've had smaller developments, which there's been much less pushback on. And I think those are the type, again, I mean, given the nature of our community, we're not likely to see really large projects. But on those smaller ones, we've had some issues too with, and there are things that Michelle had touched on, whether, because we're obviously at this cusp now where we want to plan for the future. We know it's coming, but EV cars are not that common now, and they're a little bit more pricey. And if we're designated, some of these spaces are just EV required only, then that takes away from required parking of all the people that don't have the EV cars. And a lot of them are sitting empty right now, even in Ann Arbor. However, we know the wave of the future. If we don't start planning now, the idea is that, like with these new developments, even to get that conduit now, it's a lot easier now to put the conduit when you're building a new building. So, I mean, that's kind of where I was going to be leaning with some of these when we're having new developments, is that obviously when you're under construction, even if it's not EV installed, you run that conduit and put up a little port right there. It's ready for it. That's minimal money, especially when you've already got all the ground ripped up. So again, if we were to site plan something, to think about like the Country Market Plaza or Bush's Plaza comes in for a new site plan, And that triggers the parking requirements to be brought up to code. Now, if we have a required, that's somewhere we might get a little bit of pushback on installation and versus costs and things like that. Again, in the required and the signage, because that does take away from, we would see probably smaller, we see smaller developments obviously here. So if you think of a care to cure building and, the proper percentage is so difficult to gauge on those of the percentage, because I think there's some, we thought we were doing it right in Ann Arbor, of course, but then there's always these extremes for the larger ones. With our smaller parking lots, if you take away, say, 3 spaces from care to cure, would that make a difference? We in effect would be taking away 3 from regular cars and 3 EV that may sit there for a year or 2 or maybe 4. So are we okay with that? However, we know that care to cure building is going to be there hopefully 50, 70, 80 years, and these will probably be more common as we go along. So those are some of the issues that we've been seeing, as well as I'm trying to go through my little, the age of the reserve required, the installation costs. But from the smaller parking projects, again, we've seen for the most part people that have pretty much willingly gone along. I mean, to a T, they always say that this is too much too soon and things like that. We've got one of our residents has an EV car, nobody does, but again, sooner or later you have to kind of make that jump to require it or not. So I think whether it's required or kind of we just allow it to happen, that's a good question for the kind of development that we expect to see, I think, in Dexter, but also what we want to encourage. I mean, we know these kind of sustainable things are good, but we also have to, kind of weigh between all these other options. And like I said, we have much different issues in Ann Arbor, but it's been an interesting process in Ann Arbor. I mean, kind of going through that again, about 1.5 years or so. We're just starting to see some of the newer developments that are getting COs or coming online that have had that already installed. So we'll see how that's gonna work with their parking. We also regulated where they're installed, the EV parking, so you can't put them all in the back far corner, or you can't put them all right at the door. We had one person who wanted them all right along the door and then put the ADA space out to the side. And so we said, you gotta kind of even them out. So there may be spacing requirements that come into play with that. So I think that was kind of all of it. So I don't know how much value that adds, but it's because it is a different animal, but required versus just allowing it. Yeah, it's an interesting discussion.
Can you talk again to the difference between capable versus the install? Or the difference between ready versus capable?
Right.
capable versus install?
So yeah. And I think this was kind of a little bit of overkill on our, I mean, EV capable, EV installed. So yeah, EV capable is just like literally you've got your circuit breaker in the house and everything else, and you put a designated circuit breaker to support whatever. And again, I don't know a lot of the different electricity requirements of all that, but you put one that's dedicated, that's able to support that. And then you put some of the conduit in, at least out to, say, if it's a parking garage, you stub it to the edge of the garage. So it's very minimal work. It's like interior into the building, just adding wiring and another circuit, very minimal. And then the EV, that's EV capable. And then EV ready is you do all of that work pretty much and bring it right to the ground in the parking lot, and you put a port right there and you cover it up. And then so it's like, it'll be, like a little mini manhole cover or whatever else. And then when you get the chargers, you pop that open, you put the little station, well, more complex than that, but you put it on top of that. That's EV ready. And EV installed obviously is with the chargers both installed. And we have requirements that you can't put a charger up that can only install one, or can only charge one car. It has to be multiple car charging. There's a couple of other things in there, but enforcement will be a whole other issue. So I don't know, like if our inspectors in single family houses, which it wasn't quite for like Barton, but like South, we haven't had many subdivisions of single family houses go up, so like in the last year. So yeah, this hasn't really, we've had one plan approved and it shows it on the plans. It says all garages will be EV. Yes, so how much that goes forward is another story. No, because those are all approved before the EV. Yeah, so any new subs coming on now will not have that. And so most of the buildings, like I said, it's only been about 1.5 years. And it's only for the required parking. So a lot of the ones you see downtown Ann Arbor doesn't have a parking requirement. So there, even some of the for the, don't get too complex, but for the base FAR, the base floor area in like downtown Ann Arbor, there's no parking required. If you use premiums and you go above that, then you have to park for the area that you've used premiums, and that's required parking. But usually that's a couple of spaces here and there. So most of the student high rises you see down there, well, those are all built before this, but they would be required to provide EV parking only for the required parking. So some of them wouldn't have to do it at all. So, yeah, I think
Stations we have downtown now. It's probably
the DDA, correct. So in the DDA, right, has also installed some spaces which they charge for, I believe. But I saw a little charger thing on there. So they have like a little charge card, almost like,
Parking space.
yeah, like a parking meter, right? It's the same kind of thing that they charge for. I don't know how well those have been used yet or not. So it's like, how much do we, how soon do, I mean, if we require it every 2 years, right, exactly. You know, but we want to prepare for it. We want people ready for it. We want to encourage it. I mean, I think downtown would probably is a good idea. I mean, people can use it for different businesses, but it takes away from it. Yes, Jim.
In the dissent. I might be the only person who actually owns a book.
Probably, I do
Well,
not.
that's a good question.
Yeah, does anybody have hybrid or electric car? Ah, I guess. All right, Jim. Oh, Jack, all right.
Okay.
And so I'm also very, would like to. You know, I think the consensus among people in the industry is that 10 years from now, more than half of our sold may be electric vehicles. But I'm still completely opposed to us telling the next wishes of the next development that they have to put these charging stations. And as someone who owns one, I don't think they're necessary. I think that what we will see is that people will charge in their home. And that any public charging stations, aside from interstate charging chargers, will be an amenity. And people will put them in to attract customers, to attract traffic. And I think we would be wise actually to make an ordinance that said any developments of 3 or more units have to have, for instance, the dryer plug in the garage. We're gonna at some point, someone's gonna try to match themselves into the village. We might as well hold those people hostage to the highest standards that we can, and maybe scare them off. And so I think it's a good thing in a residential setting for 3 or more units or 4 or more units. But I hate the idea of us telling people we're going to develop new business spaces in this town. And people who are going to renovate business spaces. I hate the idea of us telling them they have to install a still evolving technology. We're guessing that's what the public's going to want. I just hate it.
So when you say.
So,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
sorry, but to that point, that was, Jim reminded me of something that was also really good is other experiences we've had, is particularly like with the churches, is that to Jim's point, a lot of the people had brought up, it's like, well, our parishioners are coming in here, they're staying for an hour. Off our chargers, I guess they get like 2 minutes worth of drive. It's like nobody's plugging, because they're in there so short, and also to some of those like the convenience stores, people are running in, they're not plugging in their car to go 10 minutes and then running out. But like Ann Arbor, we require it for everything. So again, they're with the standard chargers, and I forget the numbers, not the fast current chargers, which are right now much more expensive, to your point of evolving technology, is that everybody, we don't say, you know, which one to install. So that even the cheaper ones, like I said, we're getting stats back from these different things that said, okay, they're going to plug it in for an hour, they're going to get 5 minutes of driving time or whatever. It's if it's a level 1, exactly. So that was a point. Or even like fast food restaurants, again, it's this required. We've had some of that come up, or banks, it's required. We've had one that has to put in 10 spaces.
Your turnover is higher.
In your train, people are running into it. Nobody is plugging it. Even if you're fully electric, you're going to get a minute. So
Until the technology.
thank you, Jim, for bringing that up. And in residential, right, is where you're going to go home, or even at work. Now, I know we can't, now, obviously, people work at the commercial places as well. Like, they could plug in their car while they're there for 8 hours working at the convenience stores or gas stations. But yeah, that's a very good point.
Stations are also extremely expensive. And
Right now, yes.
Part car and driver just put some in and take car. Have all the costs in it. It can be 50 down the station.
Yeah, that's what the numbers we're hearing, again, from the churches really preventing.
level 2,
Level two.
level 3?
Level 2 or level.
With the level
2 or
3. If you're putting new ones in right now, you're laying essentially the same electric you're doing. And so the only difference is the end station essentially. And no one's putting in just a level 3 right now. They put these stations in that converts 2 or essentially.
Anecdotally, relative to what Jim was talking about there, my daughter who lives in Phoenix has electric, whatever it is, I don't even know what kind of car it is, what's the one? She drives a lot, but it's always short. She charges it at home. And she says she's used a half a tank of gas in the last month and a half. She just used a regular outlet there in the garage with an extension cord or whatever.
Mhm.
And it takes care of basically everything. It's just amazing.
I have a Chevy Bolt and I use a regular outlet, but you know, the most you're gonna get on the battery only is about 40 miles on
Yeah.
a single charge.
Yeah.
And it varies with the weather up and down.
Right.
But there are a lot of weekends when I'm running errands between here and Ann Arbor, Costco and Silent, I don't use any gas the whole weekend. But I also don't need a level to charge it, I just charge it overnight. I'm very pro-electric, but man, I'm very down on just trying to make.
So when you say not requiring stations, does that mean that we wouldn't want somebody, if they were redeveloping the site, to retrofit to have conduit put in? Okay.
So what are?
And Dustin had his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. I'm sorry. I'm still getting used to it. Gotta look around for everybody.
I do like the idea of having like the EV capable. In the sense of like having the wiring be there, but not necessarily making sure everything else is set up, you know, let the homeowner do that or whatever. But I have a couple questions in the sense of, I don't have an electric car. My understanding is like a Tesla plug will not work with someone else's plug.
Correct. That's
So-
what I was in.
Until you standardize a sort of system, you know, if I go to the gas station now, I can put in my gas, I'm done, everything's good. But if the outlet that I choose, like a Tesla one, won't be able to charge different ones. So how are you gonna play that game? Is there any idea of standardizing requirements for the plug usage or anything like, is there gonna be any oversight on that aspect for all this? And like I said, I'm very pro, like, I think it's a good idea. I would like to see EV capable. I don't know, EV ready, I think that's a little much, but it's kind of my feeling with Dexter, is my thoughts.
That is a good question. So the Teslas have that separate outlet, but do all the other electric cars have the same kind of plug-in?
The Nissans also have different, the Nissan Fast Card is different. Than others. Most of them use, so if you look on the chart, there's a shows the plug on level 1 of the way. When you get to the fast card, it's different. So if you go to page,
The level 1 is the same level 2 is the same, but if you go to page 13.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Right.
yes, right, on 13, look down.
Yeah, it's like European versus.
Yep. Look down at their connector types. See that for level 1 and level 2, the connector types are the same. But for the level 3, there's the first one, which is essentially the same one as the 1 and 2, but with 2 additional inputs underneath it. And then there's 2 other different ones. And I think the other 2 are, one's a Tesla and one's a Nissan.
Right, the last one is the Tesla, and the middle one is the Shamdamo, whatever that stands for, and that could be weird.
Yeah.
Nissan one. Like I said, there's a lot of a lot of terminology I threw at you, and what I put in your packet were real basics.
Tesla thinks theirs is better than everybody else, and they don't switch. They're just going in and, you know, finding private sites that will let them charge stuff, so they've got to do it online, so you'll have Tesla chargers. I think the Nissan fast charger is only available at Nissan dealerships, but you can go there and charge for free. if you're-
So other thoughts required, optional, EV ready, kind of,
I don't think required. The issue that sort of, well, that sort of stumps me is how is setting aside a large number of parking spaces that will have to stay empty until the market kind of catches up with what we do. And I mean, I thought maybe what we would do is designate spots for, you know, with a sort of, I'll call it this peripheral parking lot. You know, you start to go up Main Street, you know, and you're getting close to the Elmhorn. There you could put one, you know, somebody can plug in their car and then go downtown and eat dinner or whatever it is that would do, that would take an hour. But if you put it right in front of Hackney,
Yeah,
it's gonna be ugly, you know.
well, yeah, so there is that. Any stations within public lots or public streets. Those will be ones that the city and DDA put in, but again, they're gonna be looking at that, how many miles you get on an hour's charge. And even with the level 2, you're not getting very far. You're getting 30 miles, if I remember right, on an hour charge. And most of the spaces on Main Street, at most, it's a 15-minute turnover. So,
if we want it to be turnover.
right.
So.
So if there are going to be any public stations put in, they would be put in places where people are going to park longer. It's not going to be street parking. It's going to be in parking lots.
The
So
library.
in Ann Arbor, they have unlimited parking structures, and I believe they're free.
Yeah, no, I don't think in the.
In the
GA
market
structures.
structures, I think.
Yeah.
they might.
Well, I guess 'cause you paid.
And they're always full during their workday. Not always full.
Yeah, and that's where, again, I think we're seeing some, because the business uses, whereas, well, it's just starting, as I said, to come online with some of the newer, like, commercial developments we've had to require on them. But that was, yeah, the downtown, the structures, you're getting the people that, or when I was in the Ann Ashley structure, that drive there, they park their car all day 8 hours, so that makes sense. But those, the little retail lots and things like that is where it doesn't necessarily make sense, although again, like, obviously you have people that are working there for 8 hours, but maybe not to the quantity that we currently require.
But doesn't that kind of go against the whole idea of not taxing the power grid, like during peak hours? To have people do that, because I mean, that was my thought about putting places like that and letting people do that, and, you know, maybe intentionally not charging at home overnight.
Well, right, and I could see exactly, and that was a question we that's come up, but we haven't necessarily dealt with that, is that, right, like now a lot of these places that are installing it, they're not, you know, they're not charging for whatever else, but nobody necessarily, right, you could just, if you don't want to pay at home, maybe you drive your car over there and you leave it there for 8 hours or something plugged in, but I mean, right, right, it hasn't so far, and if it is, it essentially, it's a private property issue, but I mean, there is those concerns as well with the electricity, but, and when you're using the power grid, but we're also, see, Harbor's in a huge push to electrify everything, get off all natural
And
gas.
DTE is too.
So, right, actually DT is as well, so electrify everything,
Right.
which,
Both DT and consumers are putting a lot of,
Right, get
offering
that
a lot
either,
of
but-
incentives right now.
Well, that's what made me think, because DTE's already got me in the shift and save program where they're telling me not to run anything between like 3 o'clock and 7 o'clock, and which is hard when you work from home, but I do my
Yeah.
best.
So, getting back to what has brought us here, we have a commercial property owner that wants to put in stations and wants to be able to not only offer it for a tenant, but offer also for people to just plug in. We've talked about how it's not, There have been voices saying we shouldn't require it, some saying that we should make it capable. Here we have a business owner that does want to be able to do it. And so thinking about it in the section 307 review process,
On his property or on the street.
no, on his property. So you know how we've got parking spaces that are diagonal in front of the building? Those are his spaces.
That's what I mean.
Yes, yes, those are his spaces. We've already talked about that if it was public, people are coming in and out, it doesn't make sense. Question is, if he wants to do it, how do you want to regulate something like that?
Why aren't we asking, do we want to regulate?
Well, that is one question, that can be.
I don't think we should regulate.
Well, I think we have to some extent because it goes to the number of required parking spaces. So if somebody goes and puts all EV charging stations in all of their parking spaces, they've taken away potentially a parking that's required. So I think to some extent we do have to.
Have it only if they're only doing that if they say gas cars can't park. Otherwise, they've got spots that are suitable for both.
True. Yeah. But then I think that needs to go in the ordinance. I think that I understand what
Right.
Michelle is saying. We do probably need to have some regulations about it.
I would say, based on working in a number of other communities, that you need to have a policy board that's open, that tells that this is allowed and how it's allowed. Because when it's silent, even if it was enacted and done earlier, I've run into multiple building officials and zoning administrators who their attitude is if it's not in the building code, it's not in the zoning ordinance, we're not doing it. So I would really urge you to look at opening some sort of policy board if this is the sort of technology that you want. Even if it's only if somebody wants to do it on their own, not requiring it. The other thing that I'm not hearing in this discussion is whether there's the ability to, there's two things. And one this was brought up is that is an EV space only for an EV vehicle? Or are there ways that in peak times, I'm thinking, Dexter days, Dexter days when there's big events downtown, all the parking is filled. You would want those EV parking spaces filled, even if they were, or peak shopping times for those. So maybe there's doors for that, maybe there's waivers, maybe there's incentives, or maybe you don't regulate them at all.
See, this is where I think we get into trouble. This is, we cross public with private, but this is on private
Property, but if somebody's doing it for commercial gain, I think we need to regulate.
Because it could
If
become
he's
a land
just doing
use.
it for his tenants, I can see it both ways. You either regulate it, you have a policy, or you don't.
The community why? If he puts a charge point station,
Mhm.
that from my perspective, he's giving the community free mint. The charge point station, the illegal charge point station, in town right now, I can go charge for free.
Mhm.
All I have to do is get the card.
Mhm.
That's an amenity, that's an added thing to the town. Why should we be regulated?
I think.
On private property.
But when, I mean, I agree with you
So-
mostly as far as very limited, like, I'm not in favor necessarily, I'm not in favor of making it required. But I think we have to allow it and we have to create rules that allow it because of very much what Megan said is that. And we're only gonna see these increases of uses sooner or later, we're gonna have to deal with this. Because I think you're right, but like, what if then, like, I can't think, I'm trying to think of a way that they abuse. Yeah, you are. Oh, yeah, he would
Let me
be.
make an analogy. The gas stations in town charge for air.
Yeah.
We don't regulate that.
No, but they can't put the gas station in without
Yeah.
getting approval.
But if Bushes wanted to charge for air, we wouldn't regulate.
But what if somebody put up just a charging, like somebody builds a building that's all just electrical charging stations? And they put up, I mean, I think those are the kind of things,
That's not the same thing. All I'm saying.
but it's a
is
use that we don't
that
right now
If
have.
that's a separate business, like a gas station.
So it's an added accessory use.
But that's why I think we were kind of going like with this downtown. I think it would be an accessory use that, I mean, we don't want to overregulate, I agree, but it needs to be, I think, acknowledged in there that EV parking
I think we can just acknowledge it and saying that
is permitted or.
that EV charging stations are as an accessory use in residential or business setting are allowed in city decks.
Yeah, but I think that we do need to look at this a little bit more carefully, because what if they put it right in the middle of a sidewalk that is a walkable
That would be
area?
barred by current, that would be barred by current.
I'm just, we
Right, but
see
who's gonna
ways.
Look at it, Jim, that's the
Yeah.
point, right? It's like the
There's no
having
trigger.
policy would say,
Well,
you know, you
And
need to
then,
submit
and then
it.
you have the policy, because what you don't want is them to put it in the middle of the sidewalk, and then they have to remove it. Like one of the whole reasons to have these policies. is-
I gotta tell you, like, the lawyer, you guys raise that in court, the judge will throw you out. You can't say, what if they do something that's already against our ordinances? That would already be against our ordinances. It's an imaginary argument.
I get the point you're making, but the.
And putting any private thing in the public right of way is against our current.
I'm not talking about public sidewalk, I'm talking about the sidewalk leading up to Bushes, if they stick it right in the walkable area, now it's no longer ADA compliant. That's what I'm talking, I'm not talking about the right of
But
way.
again, you just touched on our other thing. It's not ADA compliant. That's already regulated. That's already.
But to Megan's point, if we aren't looking at it first to tell them that if this is why this is a problem, then they have to go rip it out and have more expenditure. I think that having a policy, maybe it doesn't have to be an ordinance,
Right.
maybe it does have to be a policy, like come in, have your plan looked at, make sure somebody checks all the boxes and says, yeah, good to go.
Minimal egress routes, but I think, yeah, so I get your point, Jim, and I think I'm in favor very much of very limited, but I'd be interested, other opinions, whether, again, this is what Michelle was looking for, do we kind of explore it as required or not at all? I think it's what Jim's saying, but that's an option too.
There's a sort of conceptual difference though between trying to encourage this, encourage this, having, people putting in, stations or not, well, sports pubs
Mhm.
versus stopping them. Regulation stops them. But there are incentives that, in this required system that there is in Ann Arbor. Well, I guess it goes beyond encouraging. It's, no carrot, just stick, but I think there are two different things in operation here. That one is, how do we sort of help this thing along? Because this car, the market's going to change. The car manufacturers all have these, sort of stream of timing where there's this is the last combustion engine that's going to come off our assembly line going out to 2045. And we're going to need to be able to do this. How do we get ready in that respect? So it's not a situation where don't go to Dexter, you can't, it'd be like not having a gas station.
So maybe even.
So
as
there
an
are two
accessory
things
use.
going on that are different to me, and somehow we're kind of, I don't have any more intelligence than that, but I'm just feeling like there are two different things going on.
Yeah, Dustin?
I bring up a good point, the parking issue, because if I'm anti-electric cars and there's nothing that's gonna stop me from parking in front of the spots and no one else can use that terminal because I don't want them to, how are you gonna stop that from happening if you don't have any rules in place? Or like who can use it, when they can use it, time they can use it. I understand like if there's a parade or something like that, but what's gonna happen? And they already had that happening for like the Tesla lots where people were just parking their cars in front of it. They're like, you're not gonna use it.
But if it's on private property, same as, for instance, if you park overnight on someone's private property, they just can't have it towed. We're not talking about doing public spots in Dexter. So I don't think that's an issue. But anything that's private, it's up to the private landowner to enforce it. Like, that, right? I don't know.
Well, it's up to the private, if there could be something in zoning where then the private landholder could ask the city to do it. So,
But that's not a job we do now, right? We don't tow
No.
anybody.
no, so if somebody in Bushes is parking, if somebody at Bushes parking lot parks in the ADA space, without the sticker, then it's up to that private business to ticket them. It's not the city who comes in and does it. I think what I was saying in terms of, what I meant in terms of the spaces is that it's EV vehicle dedicated only. There are peak times, whether it's private or public property, or perhaps all of those spaces in the parking lot would be needed, especially for some of the small sites that you have here in Dexter, like the Cure to Cure site. They need all those spaces. And so to have even one or two spaces taken out of action, may be a liability in terms of other safety concerns.
But I think that actually plays to my,
Yeah,
how would they be taken out of use unless we wrote an ordinance saying that they should? Because if the business wants circulation through their parking lot, they're not going to make them EV only. I don't know, I mean, I use these sites, I don't think I've ever seen a private one that's EV only. I've seen some public ones, the Ann Arbor, I believe, has signs EV only. But I don't think I've ever seen private property that says, not saying it doesn't happen, I just haven't encountered.
and just to support your point, as a private individual who owns an electric car, mine's hybrid, but it's primarily plug-in, is the one time I attempted to use a charger outside my home, it was the Myers in Style. It was so complicated that it wasn't worth my time. I had to download an app and then I had to pay something and continue, and I did it all, I've never used it, there were 5 plugs. All I wanted was to go in and get my shopping done. And I couldn't, so that's enough for me, and I'm a planner and all of that. But there's some, I think what it says is the behavior is still evolving, the technology is still evolving. What my advice to you as your planner is to create some policy space for these things to come in and decide, what's your goal? You're asking the right questions. What's your goal with it? What do you want to have happen? What's your vision? And then what fits within your community values? And then craft the language from there. And I think with this test case that's coming in, where this gentleman wants to use this very specific man's property, it's a fantastic opportunity for you to apply that to the site and think about how it works, and then go a bit larger to see where we work out. Knowing that this is going to change, and you're probably going to need to amend whatever you have 5 years from now.
Wellness center is really easy.
What?
The wellness center is really easy to use.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So Michelle, are you getting some direction? I don't hear a lot, I mean, are we hearing? I don't know if I hear anything from required. Are we hearing a lot of stuff?
I don't,
related to
well, that's one
required?
thing I'm absolutely sure on. Nobody is saying that we need
Okay.
to require, except if,
I would require it in large development, residential development.
right. Right, I did
Perhaps.
that I did get. Is there anybody that wouldn't be, even though we're not proactively looking at annexing property, if somebody came in and proposed 3 or more units on any space within the city, or at some point somebody does request an annexation for larger property outside the boundaries, would requirement for spaces, the requirement for making it ready, or require it that the house, it should just be ready, it's not every.
Well, you're talking about single family homes. or
Single
like-
family home or multiple family.
Maybe I think just means having
Okay.
Pretty much. We would have to make sure, I mean, there's that important, like, for us, like, even in Ann Arbor, obviously, we're all under one same roof. The building inspectors now know to look for those. But with county, we're gonna have to actively reach out to that, because the county inspectors aren't gonna be looking for requirements of plugs in buildings. So, I mean, I think that's where we gotta connect that to make sure that it actually gets enforced or gets installed.
So for something like that, for what was just outlined, single family, multiple family, 3 or more, or a larger scale residential development, to to make that a requirement to be EV ready. That's something we could do as part of the zoning ordinance update. That's not something that I need to necessarily tackle right now. But I do need to hear from everyone on if somebody wants to do it on their own commercial property, whether they use it for their tenants or for charging somebody to use it in the general public. I need some.
That's permitted to have an electric charging station on your private property. Subject to the requirement that not violate any pre-existing laws and regulations such as ADA.
Michelle, let me ask you a question. This is, to me, this has been a great discussion. It's nothing that I've given literally any thought to prior to tonight. Where is this going? Are you going to put together some suggested ordinance language for us to take a look at and respond?
My thought was, as it pertained to this commercial operation, depending on what direction I got, would be to come back with draft language for you next month that you would then determine whether you go, what changes need to be made, but then move it forward to a public hearing. If the consensus of the planning commission is that we're only going to deal with the residential as I stated it, that's going to go into the zoning ordinance update, and there's no need to come back with language. That'll happen as part of that process. If we, excuse me, if we are going to put something together to allow somebody like the commercial property owner to put up or to put in a station or two, because I have no idea how many he wants to do, and be able to use it and charge for the use of it. Based on what Jim's saying, it sounds like more of an accessory use permit, come up with some very carefully crafted language that that doesn't take us down a long haul road. That's easy to come back with to you for the next meeting.
Okay.
Because in that, I can envision a very simple tweak to the accessory section of Article 3. There might be some other minor little things like identify it as, make sure that C1 district, CBD district, VC district, accessory uses are listed as principal permitted uses in those different zoning districts. So those are little minor cleanup things. The main thing would be something in Article 3, tweaking accessory uses.
I think I like what Jim said. So at least we're adding it. I think I would support that it's added to the code with that kind of language. We acknowledge it as an accessory use.
Mhm.
I think that that's also key. I mean, if it becomes a problem, I always think of like, well, what complaints would I get if I was working on it, or how could somebody abuse that code? But if it's written as an accessory use, I mean, I don't know when this would ever happen, but if it ever did, somebody wants to come in and install just like a gas station, but all charging things. And we don't want that as necessarily a primary use until we look at it. Maybe we do. But for now, I think a simple way of dealing with what we have in front of us, an accessory use to the primary use of his retail office use there. It's perfectly acceptable. And if he wants, it's private property. And if he wants to do them all, he can park it. And if people don't have a place to park, that's his issue. So I think that for now, I think that approach would work. It acknowledges it and it regulates it to a very little degree.
Do you start it with only the central business district? Do you open it to all commercial districts?
Yeah, I don't know why we wouldn't open it to Dexter
Okay.
Crossings, the strip mall.
So then my next question is, do you limit the number?
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. How do we?
I would. Private property, familiar property, customer stats.
But then I go to what Allison said, and all of these different commercial sites have been approved with X number of parking spaces for their use. X number of them are ADA. If you start making them for, well, unless they're going to be used either or.
I think we're looking for a problem where there isn't one. Business wants people to be able to get in and out of their businesses. They don't want spots filled and not turning over. I mean,
I think you're right now.
Yeah, right
It
now.
might be an issue 20 years from now. But
we can always imagine.
right, yeah, right now, I think you're right. I don't think that people are really rushing to,
What I have a difficult time understanding is with the care-to-care example, there was a lot of contention discussion around their being able to provide enough parking on the site. And they're still tentatively, we're probably going to have a conversation about converting some spaces for EV charging. I can see a situation where they effectively further reduce all of that already limited parking on site if they make those spaces exclusively for EV chargers. I mean, I don't have a hard time wrapping my head around is that we have this requirement that X or certain uses provide X number of parking. It couldn't be very easily be giving people an opportunity to eliminate that.
I think sometimes we get too hung up on the parking requirement as opposed to the reason for the parking. And first of all, remember this, if the industry thinks that 10 years from now, half of our solar will be available, so that even if they were EV exclusive, because the business owner decided they should be, over time, they're going to get used more. But more importantly than that, we tell a business that a certain amount of parking spots. Both because we think we don't want that business overflowing out to public streets, essentially. But also because we think that's about what a certain business needs. If the business in the end puts the spots in, as we said, but thinks that they can use them differently, should we tell them they can't?
Yeah, well, yeah.
You know, I think
That's a
that
trickier.
there are a certain number of merchants out there who would be happy to have a conversation, figuring that it's going to attract a certain percentage of business that they're not getting right now. And in the one in the old Encore space, that's obviously what he's thinking. I'm going to do this. It's going to help my customers. I don't even know what his business is. People are going to come there because of that.
Right.
The restaurants may want it because people do sit there, so plug in for an hour.
And currently all of our downtown restaurants don't have their own parking. It's public parking. So
Just a question, let's say we were to add language that said, you can't designate any spots as in the owner. Let's just say. I would be afraid we would create more conflict because people would just park. There are more non-EVs now. They would park there, the person who put them in intended them for EVs, and they kind of get mad. I think there's more likely more conflict in a rule that you can't designate them as EV only than there is a problem in saying just do what you think is right for the private business.
I think what you might run into more, Michelle, is the idea somebody wants to put it in, and then maybe they're also ripping out required landscaping at the same time.
right.
That's probably more of that site compliant. I get it, we're telling them that they can't do anything that isn't compliant, but they may not realize what they're doing.
They're so expensive now that I just can't see somebody coming in.
Yeah, I guess how much do we right now build this ordinance for 10 years in advance? We want to get it prepped for that, I think, but I don't know about the requirements quite yet, but I think we need to set up that structure, put as accessory, And we've got the necessary framework going forward because it is only going to be increased. But right, I don't see right now somebody coming in and installing a bunch of, from what I'm hearing and what I've known before, it's just not cost, there's no cost benefit to installing all these stations for, just to make money. So, right, I don't want to regulate a problem we don't have yet, but I want to set it up so that we're aware, and this is great to have this discussion because to be aware of these issues and the pluses and minuses of both sides. So
And I have had one property owner in Ann Arbor install a private station in the right of way. Under a license agreement. Yeah.
What'd you do?
We had to create a license agreement for it to allow it to go in.
okay, so
It's the only one though.
Okay, so, we'll do this, we'll put a toe in the water, we won't put our foot in. And I'll come back with some language that you guys can talk about. I'll probably do some following up with Matt and, with Allison, and I'll do some, discussion with Megan, and, like I said, come back with something EV light. And you all can digest it and figure out if it's something that, how you want to tweak it or broaden it, water it down, whatever. And we'll just go from there.
Kyle,
Well, I mean, I suppose I'm on both sides of this issue because on one hand, I agree with Jim that just give them a way to do it, let it happen for now. And this will, you know, this is gonna come back again. On the other hand, it's like, if they are gonna go in, you know, come back to like the form and the look and stuff, especially closer to the sidewalk, like some of these charging stations are kind of weird.
they're big, they're
Modern,
bulkier.
big, bulky and stuff, so like, maybe by the time we start to get them, somebody has minimized these things and put a little trim on them or something.
Yeah, I don't even think we can get into the design. of it at this point.
Yeah. Sure.
Something to think
Okay, would that be satisfactory to the commission?
So are there any signage issues, like, for the, like, if it's gonna be on private property?
So I think there are ways that we can craft language that's more of, that guides. If ultimately, if the person is providing a parking space that is going to be for charging, he or she is going to want to mark it. And it should have a proper signage.
Some consistent signage, not
Consistent,
like, not like
And when I say proper, that's
88
what I
people
mean.
having their own concept of.
Right, it's
Okay.
not gonna, it's
Yeah,
gonna
that's
have to
what I
follow
realized.
a
Okay.
standardized
Okay.
model. I know that there are places that have, and they're private spaces as well as public, where they have ADA accessible. But because you've got commercial property sharing the same parking area, one happens to be a church and the other happens to be a Starbucks, but the handicap accessible is not enforced during the week, but it is on Sunday when church is in session. And so there's specific, you have your ADA handicap signage, but then you have times for when those spaces are dedicated for handicap use. So I could see something like that to address some of the questions people had earlier about, well, what if it's on public space and you want to be able to use it during certain times? If it's not a regular thing like a church schedule, that's when a community is going to use the temporary no parking and cover the sign, or temporary all public parking. Does that make sense to everyone?
Good. Anything else on EV parking? Where is the slide? Now you have everything. Crystal
Yes.
clear, right?
It is much clearer. It's.
Okay. Good.
It's very helpful. It's very helpful.
All right, perfect. Okay, moving along then. Item B under new business, zoning ordinance update from the subcommittee. That'd be Megan.
Would you better have one up to the mic?
However you want to do
This
it.
is new and exciting.
New and exciting.
All the cords still trip on the.
Yeah. So tonight, the committee met in person for the first time, and we went over special land use. So we went over special land use Article 8. There are very few changes to that except for the end section, which has all these uses that are listed, and all the regulations with them. As we discussed with you in the diagnostic review, all of those are moving to a draft Article 14. Specific regulations, specific use regulations, as well as those uses in general provisions that would move there. Would move there as well. So we talked through those and made some decisions about combining all the drive-through regulations together instead of them having mixed different uses. You have right now one by banks and one by restaurants. And taking the form-based code structure and applying it to those uses where it's applicable. And such as in those drive-through lanes, because something on Dexter and Arbor Road is gonna look different than something on Maple Road. In terms of how it's stacking spaces, work, and what type of actually site is there. So we'll go back and change things. Also, instead of those uses being grouped alphabetically, as we have them now, at the end of Article 8, we're going to group them by category. Because the problem with alphabetical is if you have an M or an N, then it gets inserted and you have like, Article 8AC or something like that. So what we're going to do is group them by use so that's easier for people to read and find where things are. Have reserved sections at the end of each of those. So you have slots for things to fill in the future, like electric vehicles, and electric vehicle charging stations or whatever comes in the future. And so we have some rewriting to do, we'll do that. We also talked a bit of previewed signs, landscaping, and parking. So some of your discussion tonight about parking was very helpful, and we'll be drafting that, redrafting that article this month. Landscaping we will do as well. We will change a lot of the organization of it so it reads much easier. And also take some of the discussion about tree preservation and credits and things that we did with the environmental chapter, move those into landscaping. So that will be drafted. The other thing we'll be working on is signs. I will warn you, the planning commission, as I warned the subcommittee. There's a Supreme Court case that was a number of years ago that your sign regulations will need to radically change because in a very simplistic way, Mr. Carter can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure he will, is basically if you have to read a sign to know what type of sign it is, that sign is unconstitutional because it's regulating freedom of speech. So you can no longer have separate regulations for a garage sale sign, a real estate sign, and a political sign. All of those are temporary signs that are usually posted in the residential area. That you can regulate signs by are, as I've said, the temporary signs, their construction. So whether they're there in a temporary way, semi-permanent way, or permanent way. Their location, that can mean zoning, that can mean street type, that can mean the miles per hour on the road. And then also how their construction, how they are fixed, whether it's to the ground, or whether it's to a building or hung from a building. So things like you have a very specific regulation right now, which that banners across the street can only be nonprofits.
Correct.
That is not, that's gonna have to change. So,
When she's, let me,
yeah,
when she says that's gonna have to change, if the community wants to continue to allow that, you won't be saying nonprofits. It's commercial and non-commercial signage, and they have to be treated equally.
And you have to prepare for anything to be a trust thing. It's content neutral is the best way that you cannot control the content of signs.
so this will be another time where everybody's gonna have to adjust their headspace as you've been doing for form-based zoning. September 20th, we will all meet here again with city council and ZBA to go over those form-based districts and use-based districts together. Michelle and I will have challenges for you to see who can use the zoning best and figure it out.
There will be prizes.
There will be prizes.
Will it be food?
Yes, there will be.
But in the meanwhile, in the next 2 weeks, I asked the subcommittee members to do this, but I'll also ask you planning commissioners. Because I know some of you, landscaping may be your specialty, and you may know some things that you would like to see there, for signs, for parking, unloading. And so that there are things that you've been wanting to change, or models that you have, or suggestions that you have, please send them to Michelle and myself. Be happy to answer any questions about where we are in the process.
Does anybody have any questions?
When will we have the so the 20th is the meeting, so.
The 20th takes us up through, it's mainly focused to make sure you have an idea of what we've done so far. It's not signs, landscaping, parking.
Oh, okay.
It's taking you up to form-based code and
Oh, okay.
everything like that.
By Friday, I'm hoping I will be giving to Michelle to transmit to all of you in
Okay.
preparation for the 20th, the zoning map. Article 9, which is, sets up the zoning districts and the use-based districts, and Article 10, which is the form-based districts.
Okay, but the 20th is, I can go over all of the landscaping and parking, just.
No,
like-
because that'll be another joint meeting in the future.
Okay,
But you want our ideas for that, by the way.
But she.
right, okay. To go for the next.
Because
But not
those
the
three topics will
17th, I
get
think, was the
started on by the zoning ordinance committee.
So you're gonna get something to Michelle real soon for distribution to all of us.
Of what you're going over on the 20th, yes.
Okay, and the reason I said I can't make it to the 20th, so I want to have enough time to look through that, forward my comments in some fashion with someone.
That's fine.
That'd be great.
So
Well, Ms.
so to clarify, the stuff you're getting to us to look over is the stuff for the 20th? That's not the landscaping, parking, and you don't, what she wants from you for those is what your thoughts may be based on what's in the current ordinance that you find lacking, you like, don't like, get rid of, add. Okay. Two separate.
assignments.
I'm sure when you reach out the email, you'll explain that. So we don't.
No, this tonight was it.
That's it, okay, that's it, it's your last explanation.
You'll get more explanation. Thanks, Megan. Does anybody have any other questions for her?
No, but I, excellent. Some pretty good.
Thank you.
It's going to be,
Yeah.
it's gonna be hard. More at city council level than it is gonna be.
The signs. Yeah, I mean, Ann Arbor we had to redo the whole sign code as well, and we're getting it's because content neutral, so anybody can put up a sign of anything.
Not obscenity, though.
No.
Well, there's certain but you can also have very offensive things that aren't necessarily offensive. Or obscene,
Obscene.
yeah, sure, right, obscene but not offensive, where you draw that line, but you're right, you can't put like swear words, there's a certain
Right,
limitations.
there's
I
certain
think.
things like that, but basically, if you have to read the sign to know what type it is, to regulate it, you can't do that.
Yeah, that was a key thing. That was a good way to put it, how it was also contract neutrality, and if you have to read
Read
the
it.
sign, then you can't put, you can't read the sign. It doesn't matter. A sign is a piece of board, whatever it is.
In terms of things like the banner across the street, it's better to think of it, it's better to think of it as an access regulation. Who has access to do a thing? Than it is to think of it in some ways as a sign.
Yeah.
So
Easier said than done.
Yeah.
I'll bring you to this council. meeting.
Yeah.
It's gonna be hard, because it's the ability in a small town to allow institutional nonprofits to do what we do has always been viewed as part of our small town
Right, it's
character.
community built. I mean,
It's a
put a Dexter
community.
Days banner across there, you know, the chicken bowl, whatever it may be, it's part of a community.
And it may have the best of intentions.
The,
Pardon me?
the political climate in this day and age is really gonna be hard to. I can see banners up there from all sorts.
Yeah,
Oh, absolutely.
right, that's,
Well, in terms of the access to, that's a right of access, so there may be another, that may be another policy word.
yeah, that's a very unique,
Rather than putting it over, but where we really run into it with other communities is temporary signs. So political signs, garage sale signs.
for sale signs of
for sale
real
signs.
estate, homeowner, you know, private,
Homeowners,
single
how
family
many people
homeowner.
allow them a lot in the yard? Typically, in these ordinances, you will allow 3 to 5 temporary signs in, at a time in someone's yard. Because of the, you know, it could be a real estate sign, it could be a garage sale sign, it could be a political sign, it could be all these things that you now regulate by name instead. And that's where it's been talked, and honestly, also it's been talked with elected officials, that you can no longer regulate political signs and when they come up and when they come down.
So the question I've got is, being that real estate signs have a certain format, because of this ruling, when we and other communities set up the regulations for the size of a temporary sign on a private lot, it's not gonna be that 3 foot tall with panels anymore. It'll be something different. How is that industry going to?
Typically, you allow 3 foot high panel, and then you also will allow snake sign or like that. So it might be that you can have a maximum height for the sign, but typically this and this are about the same size. So you make them.
So you make it, you change it the height.
Right.
Okay.
So you have a max height, but then you have the sign.
Okay.
So that, you know, the copy.
Okay, I couldn't visualize how that was. gonna
Right. Some ordinances we get into like, you know, it has to be on wood posts and this and this, because you can get into construction. But I wouldn't advise that.
No. Okay. Fun times ahead.
Signs.
Okay.
I love signs. Okay. All right, moving on. So item 10, proposed business for October 4th. It's like we'll have the zoning ordinance subcommittee report again, probably a plug-in electric vehicle, something more on that. And, the condo documents for Grandview Commons.
Yes, so that's been an exercise in patience. Building 17 is in phase 3, and it was originally proposed as a potential owner wanting a walkout basement. That's minor, but that doesn't require site plan review. When it came in though, it was accompanied by a completely unrelated change, which was an undefined retaining wall that created a sidewalk and then a private patio in front of building 17 2 feet away from the
For those of us
pedestrian.
who don't remember the site plan, where is building 17?
That would be in phase 3, right up against the pedestrian pathway on the far west.
So
So
kind
is
of
it
like
a
the back
duplex or
corner.
is it?
No,
It's a 4-plex.
like the center buildings that they're building, it's one of, it's the farthest one, yeah, to the
Yes.
west.
To the west. Well, the, excuse me, it's very steep slope there. And they hadn't planned for how to get a person to the front of the building from the driveway. And so they need to figure that out now. Took a little while to get plans that would explain that. We've sat down with them now. They will only be doing a sidewalk with a small retaining wall to get the unit owners, 2 of them, from the driveway to the front covered stoop. There will no longer be a patio in front and a retaining wall of unknown size, 2 feet away from the pedestrian walkway. So that will go back to being a minor change. And that will be done administratively. But now they have to redo the condo docs because they submitted the condo docs with all these changes that they hadn't explained to begin with.
Almost disappointed in the company. I think that the philosophy there is if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying.
It's not a cheating, it's just whatever. So what was it, May, when I could hear you in my left ear, yeah, through this entire process.
And honestly.
Well, maybe not for some, that certainly did for me, but it also was very helpful, because now it will just be this amendment to the condo doc, but it'll all be subject to this administrative, and if they don't have the administrative stuff to me to be able to review it ahead of time before the condo doc, you may not see that in October. We'll just have to wait and see.
This conversation actually makes me think it's a shame we didn't require you to be ready units before.
Maybe we can make it part of the.
Can we go retro? Oh, you're opening up the site plan, the condo, I like. what you're
Now
thinking.
we've replaced bike racks as the new thing.
That's right. Well, now we need e-bikes too, so we need e-bike charging stations. I'm right with that.
That's what I was saying, oh my God, my husband is spoken.
I like that one. Thanks, Sharon. Okay, is that, I guess for next meeting?
Yes,
Okay.
it should be, I have my fingers crossed.
All right. All right, item 11, citizens wishing to address the commission. Anybody online?
No one is on.
Seeing nobody out there, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I guess I didn't need my glasses to hear you, but for some reason. Okay, move, Hill, support, was it Weiss? All right, all in favor of adjournment, say aye. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you for bearing with me. I'm a little rusty today, but gotta get used to these things. It's much easier having a meeting in person than it is to run it on Zoom, on a laptop screen, so.
Oh, were you really?
I was doing